People of Reddit who were once reported missing. What happened to you? I walked away from a home where I was being abused. Before I left, I wrote a note making it absolutely clear that I had no intention of ever coming back. About an hour or two later, I got a call from the local police station. They told me my family had reported me missing. I explained exactly what had happened and why I had left. Once they understood the situation, they simply wished me the best of luck. I was already an adult, so I had every legal right to leave. That was 3 years ago. Back in 2015, I had a complete emotional breakdown after losing my job. It had already been an incredibly rough year, and getting fired was just the final straw. So I packed a backpack, got on my motorcycle, and rode to another city just to get away from everything for a while. I brought enough cash to last about a week, turned off my phone, and disappeared. For that entire week, I did exactly what I needed. I spent my days relaxing on the beach, met new people at the hostel where I was staying, and went out to bars and clubs at night. Honestly, it turned out to be one of the best weeks I'd had in a long time. It gave me a chance to clear my head and finally breathe again. At the end of the week, I packed my things and started riding back home. Then, at one intersection, I got pulled over by the police. It turned out that two of my former coworkers, the same ones I'd stayed in touch with after getting fired, had started worrying about me. They went to my apartment to check on me, but my neighbors told them they hadn't seen me in days. They searched all over town before eventually reporting me missing. The police looked into my records, checked my phone activity, saw that my phone hadn't been active for days, noticed I hadn't posted anything on social media, and realized I hadn't contacted any of my family either. While I was simply trying to escape my miserable life for a week, everyone else had assumed the worst. The police had circulated my motorcycle's license plate, and as soon as I got back onto the highway, it must have been flagged by one of their patrol cars. That's why they pulled me over. The officer was incredibly polite. He just wanted to make sure I was okay. Once he confirmed I was safe, he called dispatch and asked them to remove me from the missing persons list. Apparently, here in Australia, a missing person can only be officially removed from that list after a police officer has physically seen them in person. About 8 hours later, I finally made it home and realized just how many people had been worried about me. Honestly, I never thought anyone would actually care if I disappeared. If I'd known they would, I definitely would have left a note. I work as a paramedic, and one day we were dispatched to a call for a man complaining about severe pain in his legs. When we arrived, we found a very polite young guy sitting on the side of the road. His feet were covered in massive blisters. He told us he'd gone to a relative's funeral a few days earlier. He'd been completely overwhelmed with grief, so he decided to go for a walk to clear his head. The problem was, he just never stopped walking. He kept going for 4 straight days. Eventually, we figured out he actually lived in the same town we did, about 250 miles, or roughly 400 kilometers away. We ended up chatting about our hometown, our favorite local pubs, and a few other random things. He admitted he'd been struggling with depression for a while and realized he probably needed professional help. Unfortunately, all we could do was take him to the hospital and make sure he was safe. We did everything we could. Later that same shift, I was scrolling through Facebook when I saw an old school friend sharing a missing person post. It was the same guy we'd picked up earlier. I immediately called the police and let them know where he was. They were incredibly relieved to hear he'd been found safe. I have a brother who was listed as a missing person for an entire year. He disappeared before, but never for more than a few days. He has paranoid schizophrenia and suffers from severe hallucinations. We live in New York, and when he vanished, my parents had absolutely no idea where to even begin looking for him. For an entire year, we were constantly being called to the police station to identify bodies, wondering if one of them might be him. He didn't have any close friends or a girlfriend he could have stayed with. He had simply disappeared. Then, almost exactly a year later, we got a call from a hospital in Washington, D.C. Someone had found my brother wandering the streets in terrible condition and brought him in. Because of his illness, he'd become convinced he needed to travel to Washington to warn the government about some terrible threat. He also believed all food was poisoned, so he refused to eat. The only reason he survived was because homeless people looked after him and shared what little they had. When they found him, he barely looked like himself. He was painfully thin, weak, and covered in flea bites. Today, he's physically healthy again. Mentally, though, he's still struggling. At least he hasn't tried to run away again. Ever since that happened, whenever I see someone who's homeless, I can't help but think about my brother and the people who kept him alive when no one else knew where he was. One of my earliest childhood memories is the time I accidentally became a missing person. I was 5 years old, and my family had gone on vacation to Switzerland. We were staying in the middle of nowhere, just a few cottages surrounded by endless forest. There wasn't much to do, so my older sister and I decided to play hide and seek. I came up with what I thought was the perfect hiding spot. Right across from the front door of our cottage was a huge bush, and I squeezed underneath it where no one could see me. I watched my sister search for me for about 5 minutes. Eventually, she gave up and went back inside. But I wasn't about to ruin my perfect hiding place. I figured the whole point of the game was to stay hidden until someone found me, so I just kept sitting there. About 15 minutes later, I noticed more people joining the search. My parents were running back and forth, calling my name, while I quietly watched from the bushes, trying not to laugh. I remember thinking, wow, I must be really good at this. Then even more people showed up. Guests from the other cottages started looking for me. Park employees joined in. Eventually, even the police arrived. And I just kept sitting there, convinced everyone was taking the game very seriously. Hours passed. It got dark. I was still happily hiding, completely unaware that everyone thought I was genuinely lost somewhere in the forest. My sister was only 7 years old, so she wasn't helping with the search anymore. She was just sitting on the front porch waiting. Once it got dark, the bright yellow jacket I was wearing finally stood out. My sister looked across from the cottage and suddenly realized I'd been sitting there the entire day. After hours of people searching the whole forest for me, I was finally found. To this day, it was still the greatest game of hide and seek I've ever played. I don't remember exactly how old we were, probably around 10. One weekend, my friend and I decided we were going to make some money by raking leaves. We went door to door through our neighborhood, offering to clean up people's yards for $5. We kept getting farther and farther from home, knocking on more houses, looking for more work. Eventually, we reached an intersection and suddenly realized we had absolutely no idea where we were. We'd never gone beyond our own neighborhood before. Then it started getting dark. We couldn't read the street signs anymore, and in the dim streetlights, nothing looked familiar. So we just kept walking, hoping we'd somehow find our way back. After a while, we heard a police siren and saw the flashing lights of a patrol car. The officers pulled over and asked us our names. Apparently, our parents had already reported us missing. The cops put us in the back of the patrol car and drove us home. At 10 years old, it felt like we'd been riding forever. Looking back, we'd only gotten about 4 blocks away. And when we finally got home, let's just say our parents were not happy. We got into a lot of trouble, and to make things even worse, they took every dollar we'd worked so hard to earn that day. This happened about 10 years ago, not long after my now ex-husband and I moved to California. We had a downstairs neighbor who was a seriously unstable drug addict. She was constantly causing problems, picking fights with people, and making everyone in the building miserable. One day, another neighbor started renovating his apartment. Somehow, she decided I was the one making all the noise. She came pounding on our door, screaming and threatening me. There was no reasoning with her. After that, every time I left the apartment, I tried to do it as quietly as possible because I was genuinely afraid she'd break in while we were gone. Eventually, I'd had enough. I filed an anonymous complaint with the apartment management and also contacted the police. It turned out I wasn't the only one. There had already been plenty of complaints about her. After I finished talking to the police, my husband picked me up and we went out for lunch. Then the management company did something unbelievably stupid. They went straight to my neighbor and basically handed over my complaints. When we got back home, she was pounding on our front door, screaming at the top of her lungs. We looked at each other and said, "Forget this." We drove to Walmart, bought a tent and some camping gear, and decided to spend the weekend camping in Yosemite. Before we left, we quietly slipped back into our apartment, got a little sleep, and told one of our neighbors that we'd be gone for the weekend. Then I sent a text to my mom, my brother, and my sister, letting them know we were heading into the mountains. For some reason, only my sister actually received the message. The last time I'd spoken to my mom, I told her all about the crazy neighbor downstairs who'd been threatening me. Then, I completely disappeared. We didn't have cell service and didn't come back for 4 days. When we finally returned, my voicemail was overflowing with frantic messages from my mom and my brother. They'd gone to the police because they were convinced our neighbor had murdered us. My mom didn't believe the neighbor who told her we'd gone camping. She actually thought he was covering for the woman downstairs. Her reasoning was simple. My daughter hates camping. And honestly, she wasn't wrong. That was my very first camping trip. After 3 days of panic, fear, and imagining the worst, someone finally called my sister to tell her they believed I'd been murdered. My sister just burst out laughing. She said, "She's camping." My mom went completely silent before asking, "Oh, what? How do you know that?" My sister replied, "Because she texted me." Then she asked the obvious question, why didn't anyone call me before deciding she'd been murdered? The moment we got back into cell service, I listened to all the voicemails and immediately called my parents. Then I called the police to let them know we were alive and to cancel the missing persons report. A few years later, I tried joking about the whole thing. Remember when you thought the neighbor downstairs murdered us? Apparently, it's still too soon. Nobody laughs. My favorite missing person story is about my little cousin. He was 4 years old, and our entire family was spending the day at the beach. At some point, he simply vanished. We searched everywhere for hours before finally calling the police. As it turned out, he'd wandered over to a hotel just a couple of minutes from the beach because he needed to use the bathroom. After that, he met a group of kids his age and started playing with them. Every adult at the hotel just assumed he belonged to one of the families staying there. At one point, lunch was served, and he happily sat down and ate with everyone else. Meanwhile, back at the beach, our entire family was in full panic mode. We were already talking about hiring divers to search the ocean because we thought the absolute worst had happened. The whole time, my cousin was perfectly happy, making new friends, and enjoying a free lunch. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next episode. If you have any thoughts about what happened, let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear what you think. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.